This is my Module 14 case study. Summary of the case. Assistant Principal Richard Inman has summoned a student, James, to the office to follow up with him on some tardies. A teacher reports that on his way to the office, they see James give something to another student, David. Richard calls both students to the office. He has the resource officer escort David to the office, and upon questioning and a search from the resource officer, finds that David is in possession of brass knuckles. James quickly confesses that he had bullied and intimidated David into taking the brass knuckles for him. Possession of the brass knuckles on school grounds is a felony, and so both students are arrested and taken to jail. As a result of having the brass knuckles on school grounds, they will also be suspended from school for 45 days. The assistant principal, Richard Inman, is torn because James has been in trouble in the past, but is upset to see him end up with consequences, but is especially upset because David is an honor student with no history of being in trouble or punished at all, and now he's going to be expelled from school for 45 days. Mr. Inman refuses to file the paperwork for David, resulting in being threatened by his superior that if he does not file the paperwork, he will be in violation of district policy and receive a reprimand in his file. The events took place in the hall of a junior high school. We don't know much about the socioeconomics of the school. There are several people that are involved in this. We have Mr. Inman, who obviously has a tough decision legally and ethically. We have James and David, the two students who are expelled. We have the teacher who observed the exchange in the hall, and we have the resource officer who did the search. The legal and ethical issues in this case, there are several legal or ethical issues. The first is probably the most obvious, that these two students committed a felony by having a weapon on school grounds. Ethically, then, we look at the decision of the school district to expel both students for having the weapon on school grounds. I think the biggest ethical challenge here is, should David be suspended even though he was a victim of bullying? District policy says that he should be. Mr. Inman is struggling with that decision because David's been such a great student, and he understands that some kind of an expulsion like this could hurt him academically and emotionally. I think ethically, the school district has an obligation to protect victims of bullying. You could maybe even go so far as to say that the school district has a legal obligation to protect students who have been the subject of bullying. In a nutshell, what happened: two students have been arrested and expelled for felony possession of a weapon on school property. Though a district official, Mr. Inman, is concerned that one student has been unfairly punished because they were coerced by the threat of violence. In our synthesis of facts, there's a lot of things that we know about the people. We know who was in possession of the brass knuckles, both David and James. We know that James has admitted to giving David the brass knuckles. We know that the resource officer found the brass knuckles on David. We also know that Mr. Inman has refused to file the paperwork because he does not believe that David should be punished. We know a teacher saw the exchange, but it was not clear on what happened in the exchange. We know from the reading that James is physically intimidating and bigger and older than David. We know that James has a troubled past. We also know that David is an honor student with no history of misconduct. We know that Mr. Inman is working hard to connect with students in the school. Some things that we do not know is that even though James confessed to giving David the brass knuckles, we really haven't heard from David or his side of the story. Other than the finding of the brass knuckles, it does not appear there was any kind of an investigation done to find a little bit more about what had gone on. We also don't know the history of the relationship between James and David. These two could be friends, or there could be a history of harassment and bullying that has taken place, and that's important to know as we sort through the case. And also, I think a very important piece is we don't know if due process was used in these expulsions. Were these students given an opportunity to argue their case and defend themselves before they were expelled. As we said before, this took place in the hallway of a junior high school that appears to have some socioeconomic diversity. We know there are roughly 900 students in the school. We do not know the exact socioeconomic makeup of this school, the racial demographics, or the size of the community. We know this junior high offers honors courses. We know they offer musical programs such as band. And we know because Mr. Emmons playing basketball after school with James that there are some informal athletic things that are going on after school. We also know the school has a resource officer, though that's pretty common today for most schools. And we also know the school district has an alternative school for schools to attend if they are expelled from school. In the rules and consequences, there are predetermined consequences for rule violations, which appear to have no wiggle room whatsoever. One of the most glaring things we do not know, again, is the district policy on due process. What is the process for that? And were these students allowed at due process in the expulsion? So review and prioritizing of information here. The decision to suspend David could be damaging to the school district if David's family decides to pursue legal action. We know that David's mom is upset and doesn't understand why her son was punished, even though he was a victim. I think the school district also has an issue if they send a message to victims that even when you're bullied, the school district is not going to do anything to protect you. Again, I think the school has an ethical obligation to protect victims of bullying. We also know that Mr. Emmons has refused to complete the paperwork, and we think this could be damaging to the culture of the administrative team. There could be a division that occurs there within this team as Mr. Emmons struggles with the legal and ethical decision that he is faced with. He would definitely like to challenge the school's ethical framework. He's advocating for the school district to make an ethical decision in the case of a victim circumstance. And I think he's modeling ethical personal conduct by standing up for a student that he believes is a victim who has a stake in the outcome of this. Obviously, David has a stake in the outcome of this, or whether he's going to be expelled or not. Mr. Emmons has a stake in this because he has refused to follow district policy and has been told directly that he should follow district policy. One of the things that we don't know is about if all the stakeholders have been consulted. It does not sound like from the reading that Mr. Emmons had opportunity to talk with his superiors until he refused to fill out the paperwork. So we don't know if he advocated for David. We don't know if he advocated on David's behalf to explain that he was a victim of bullying in this case. Now, we also don't know if due process was used. If due process had been used, then we'd have to assume that all stakeholders had been consulted in this decision. And I believe that we have a legal and ethical obligation to provide due process for the suspension. And so it's really not clear if all stakeholders have been consulted. I think there are still some things that we could find out. Again, we'd like to know if due process was followed. If it had been followed, then we know that all stakeholders were consulted. We know that James confessed to giving the brass knuckles to David. However, we're not really sure if this is the true version of events. The reading does not say that any further investigation was done. And so I'd like to know a little bit more about what was found out, who was questioned, what's David's version of what happened. I'd like to know about the nature of their relationship. What exactly did the teacher see? I'd like to know a little bit more about the district policy when it comes to possessing a weapon on school grounds. And I'd like to understand what their policy is when it comes to bullying and harassment. And I'd like to know if they're being charged with a crime, it's a felony. I'd like to know what the outcome of that case in court is. Did the court decide to go ahead and charge Dave with a felony, or did they waive those charges? I think if those charges are waived, the school district has a very tough time to suspend David. At this point, I don't think we know enough to make a decision. I think the district policy mandates that we expel both students. However, we saw the resource officer find their brass knuckles, but we really don't know all the details of the case, and we know that bullying had occurred. While we have a legal course of action, we don't have a clear ethical course of action, and we need to advocate for an ethical decision to be made in this case.